My name is Heather Graham. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada. As Robin said, I am the Vice President of Regulatory Science and Medical Affairs at Certara. A little bit about me. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. Prior to joining Certara 2 years ago, I had spent the previous years of my career always in the pharmaceutical side of the industry. I've always held roles either in regulatory writing or in global regulatory affairs. And I'm sharing that with the audience today because I think it's really important as we get into the panel discussion to understand the different perspectives that are coming forward to the table. A little bit of a rundown of what to expect during this session. We are going to start in a moment by introducing the panel. Following that, I'm going to go over a couple of slides just to orient the discussion that we're going to have today. And then we'll go into the panel discussion. Following the panel discussion, we will have a few minutes at the end to take questions, we hope, from the participating audience today. You can use the Q&A box in order to ask those questions, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the discussion. And if there is a question that you have for a particular panel member, we just ask that you call that out in the question so that we can direct your question accordingly. And so with that, I'm going to ask the members of our panel to come on video. And we will do a quick round of introductions, starting with Eliza Nathu.
Thanks, Heather. So, hi, my name is Eliza Nathu. I am from Roche Genentech. I also am based out of Toronto. I've been with Roche for about 10 years and been a regulatory professional for about 20 years. And about 3 years ago, I transitioned from the regulatory medical writing space into being the content strategy lead at the Roche Content Reuse and Automation Office. So this is a specialized function that works towards content solutions for different business units and embedding digital ways of working with content in the organization. And sort of in this role, I use my functional and domain knowledge about regulatory practices and submission content and authoring and review to help different business units, including regulatory units, streamline their content development strategy for speed, efficiency, and quality, but also to sort of future-proof their ways of working as these practices become more digital with time. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Matt.
Hi, everyone, and thank you all for allowing me to participate. So I joined Alexion in 2016. I actually came from the bench earlier in my career and moved into medical writing. Teams found I had a knack for software and process, and I was always the go-to person asking those types of questions. So it seemed natural that I turn into medical writing operations. Now, our group, we oversee all of the medical writing projects at Alexion, along with budgets and forecasts, manage all of our vendor relationships, and collaborate both inside the department and outside to think about ways of speeding up our document development. And along with that, the most exciting part and what you're here for is how we stay current with our technological advances. How do we remain cutting edge, leverage what's come out of industry and from our vendors and perhaps even other groups at Alexion or from beyond, leverage their process improvements to processes, technology, and figure out how we can leverage that in our department and how we pass documents to our regulatory colleagues. And with that, I will pass the baton to Angela.
Thanks, Matt. So like many of the others, I have been in this industry for a very long time. I think I'm coming up at 25 years in technical and regulatory writing next year. I've been at Pfizer for the last 6 years, and like Matt, people discovered that I love technology. So for the last 3 years, I have been the end user technology lead for medical writing, looking at ways that we can automate processes, gain efficiency, share content, et cetera. My day job is regulatory and clinical writing team management, and I'm very proud that we have this incredible team at Pfizer that is tackling incredible challenges with courage and joy. So I'm happy to be here today, and I hope to share what we've gone through.
Thanks, everyone. And Angela, I love that, with courage and joy. That's lovely. I'm going to go over a couple of slides now. And so we really wanted this to be a very interactive conversation with the panel. But having said that, it's always helpful to orient the conversation a little bit. And so I'm going to share just two very brief slides. Perfect. And so whenever we're having a conversation, it's important to really reflect on why we're having the conversation. I think many of us who have joined today, as well as anybody who's sort of paying attention in the industry, appreciates that there is a shift in the industry happening right now. In particular, for regulatory professionals, more and more we're being asked to embed technology, to explore, to embrace different types of technology. And so we wanted to spend a minute just talking about why is that? Why are we in this situation right now? And why are we experiencing this shift? And largely, this is due to pressures in the external environment. When I started my career about 20 years ago, I believe the analytics around the development of an asset from the bench to licensure took about 8 to 10 years, and it was about $800 million. Nowadays, the estimates are upwards of 15 years to get approval for a molecule, and upwards of $1 billion to develop medicines to reach patients. In addition to that, we have an increased focus around personalized healthcare. This is adding some complexity as well as adding volume to the work that we do as regulatory professionals. For example, with personalized healthcare, are we going to be writing one CSR for one patient? And what does that mean when we have a study with multiple patients, with many patients? How many CSRs are we going to be writing as part of a submission? In addition to that, we have an increase in and across our industry on improving the access to medicines across the world. And then finally, the COVID-19 pandemic, during the pandemic, we as an industry and as regulatory professionals, we demonstrated that when pressured, we can actually move very, very quickly. And so what that translates to in 2023 is that many of us in our home organizations are experiencing pressure from our stakeholders and from our leadership, asking how quickly can we go? How fast can we get that submission in? How quickly can we get this approved? And so the cumulative effect of all these external factors is that we are looking to leverage technology more and more in order to go faster, in order to maximize the use of the resources that we have in our organizations. And in order to do that, where many of us are leaning into technology and exploring technology to help us out. I want to acknowledge that when it comes to technology, the information that's available can often be very overwhelming. And so what we've done in order to sort of outline a little bit some of the technology that may be referenced as part of this panel discussion is we've bucketed it into three different areas. The first is focused around shared information. And so this is really focused on the concept of a single source of truth. So if you think about cloud platforms being used for submissions, we have a single source of truth in that a submission could be uploaded to a cloud. It could then be referred to and pulled by different health authorities, IRBs, for example. And so that's what we mean when we're talking about some of these shared information solutions. Automation efficiency tools. Now, this is where the hottest topic of 2023 sits, artificial intelligence. But in addition to AI, and both generative and NLP AI, we also have automation tools that improve efficiency by automating QC or automating alignment with a given style guide. And so all of these different technologies fit under this bucket of an automation efficiency tool. And we will be talking a little bit, I have a hard time believing that we could make it through this entire discussion today without touching a little bit on AI, which of course is on everybody's mind in 2023. And then finally, we have structured content and content reuse tools. And these are the tools that are in place in order to help us manage our content. So many of us who have been in regulatory for any amount of time, you will appreciate that you have spent some time in your career possibly copying and pasting content from one document to another. So the idea of these types of technology is that you would prepare a piece of content one time, and then you would be able to reuse that piece of content throughout different parts of the dossier. And so it's really getting us away from having to repeat the same process, the same writing process in particular over and over again, and really focus on reuse as opposed to repeating those activities. And so that's it for the slide presentation. We wanted to keep it very brief and very high level because I have no doubt that our audience has joined us today to hear from our panel of experts. Before I forget, I do want to say thank you again to our panel for participating today. It is an absolute privilege to have you here, and I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have. I have a few notes, so forgive me if I refer to them, because we did bring a few questions to start the conversation today. And so I'm going to jump into our first question, which is, we're asking the panel to describe what is the current landscape as it pertains to regulatory content technology at your respective organizations.
I'm happy to go first. I'm happy to go. So I want to do sort of the paradigm. We are in collaborative authoring space. So if you are in an organization still emailing files, I view that as step one. So collaborative authoring space. But as far as the newer technology, we have an automated system for our narrative writing. So that helps in efficiency greatly, especially in our very large programs. We use a structured content authoring system to allow us to do content reuse, and I'm sure I'll talk more about that today. And we also have immutable tables. So if our output is changed in some way, then we have a quick way to refresh the tables. And then, like everybody, we're exploring AI, and there's still more to come on that issue.
And I can go next. So I broke this up into how we work and where we work, and then kind of how we merge the two together. So how we're working, with the compressed timelines, you really need to have somebody's fingers on the document the entire time, 24/7. So we leverage a follow the sun model on that. As Angela has noted, collaborative authoring, that really is essential. So I say that's like baseline remedial efforts that are needed to make sure that everybody could be working on the single source of truth. Workflows, of course, help when they're integrated in that system, so it can send automated reminders and tasks to different people. And then that other bucket is where we work. So in those systems, we want to make sure that single source of truth is in a GXP environment. So we call them, either a RIM system, regulatory information management system, or EDMS. But I think that's another sort of level. Once you get off that SharePoint, a lot of people start with SharePoint and the collaborative authoring, thinking about using an Implexor or a Viva for your EDMS system and how to integrate those two. We're also merging those types of systems with content reuse systems, so those structured content authoring systems, and how we can have all three of those, the systems and locations of where we work all be merged together. And then with that, exploring automated language generation, automated flow of tables directly from SAS data sets into documents. Can you generate statements based on those tables? And really trying to harmonize it all together into one big hub. And I think that's a really big challenge is how to get all those things to talk to each other.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess I can go last. But I would say from what the other panelists have said, we're in a very similar space. We've had sort of EDMS systems and large repositories where we've been doing collaboration in authoring for years. And really, we've started to shift some of that to more structured content authoring over time. So instead of having just flat Word documents, having sort of components in these documents that are saved in repositories so that they can be reused across documents. And you can have almost like a source of truth for what some pieces of content are, not just tables and pieces of data. And so we've deployed some of that in our product labeling environment, in our periodic safety reports, and are kind of working through what that looks like in the clinical space and in the CMC space in Module 3. We've also done, I guess, all of the experiments that you could think about where there's natural language processing, some sort of content generation, pre sort of these large language models, even before GPT kind of became public and changed the world. But we've done quite a bit of work in some of that space and really haven't found them to be kind of production ready in some ways, but we have learned a lot over the years. And now we are probably in the space of looking at sort of these large language models and the type of content generation that exists and seeing how they can have utility in sort of this landscape that we already have internally with technology and content.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm starting to see some questions come in from our audience, and just to reiterate that we're going to start taking questions from the audience towards the end of our time here. So please keep them coming. We aim to get to all of them. If we don't, we will determine a mechanism that we can address them somehow offline or separate from this conversation today. So thank you for that, everybody. One thing that's clear in what you have just outlined, as well as from what I know of your organizations and our conversations, is that I feel that you are pretty far along the journey towards embedding these technologies. And I know there's a lot of organizations out there that are perhaps not quite so far along their journey. And so the next question I wanted to ask to the panel is, in your opinion, how should organizations evaluate possible technology solutions that they want to embed to bring some efficiency to their regulatory processes? Who wants to go first?
I can go first because I think we started our journey, I think, later maybe than Roche and Pfizer did. So we used an agile sprint methodology for evaluating our technologies, and we found that it was extremely important to talk to the stakeholders. Those are the people who are going to be selling this to the department. So we started off with a lot of stakeholder discussions, looking at the data flow currently, what are the pain points, and what would a future data flow look like, and how can we leverage the technology into that infrastructure rather than the reverse. You don't necessarily want to fit your process around the technology, but rather have the technology help you in your current process. Because we found that changing process is sometimes really hard. There's things you can't think that you don't necessarily think about, impacts that you might not be considering. We did weighted scorecards, so must-haves, nice-to-haves, what would be ideal, and then have those end users be the ones to evaluate the demos. I've seen situations where perhaps IT is the one making the decision on what systems to use, but they're not fingers to keyboard. You really want to have that person be convinced, because I'll tell you, when someone's going to be complaining about implementation, it's going to be the end users, and then you're left to deal with that. So end users. I think that's the most important start, is getting that stakeholder buy-in, and then thinking about the challenges they could have from both a cost, resource, process standpoint, and you have to basically sell them on it.
Thanks, Matt.
I want to emphasize what Matt just said. All of that is true for us. I won't repeat it, but I'll add a couple of ideas. I agree that we should not be trying to routinely modify our process around a technology, but at the same time, I think it's key that you're flexible. What is it that you may need to change in the current way of working in order to benefit from the efficiencies that technology will provide? So I think being committed to solving your problem, but being flexible in how you evaluate your technology and your own internal processes will be key, because they will never fully align. Something has to be tweaked. And then the second thing, I want to strongly emphasize that the end user, what we call at Pfizer, the business value component, is absolutely essential in the assessments. There can be very incredible technology scores from our tech group evaluating, and low business value scores. So please always include your end users. And if you are such a person, raise your hand to volunteer to be part of that evaluation process.
Yeah, it's great advice, for sure.
So I'm not going to repeat anything that was said, but I agree with it completely. The only thing I think I would add is, maybe when you're looking at technology solutions, look at them with a little bit of caution, with a little bit of skepticism, right? And I think in the past few years, the regulatory technology landscape has been flooded with different options and different solutions, that like really specialized products that do niche things, all the way to really generalized RIM systems that, can offer to address pain points across the organization. But depending on the size of your organization, what your issues are, what you're trying to solve for, not all of these are going to be fit for purpose, right? No technology solution is going to solve your business need or problem. And I think if you kind of, when you're looking at some of these solutions, really take a step back and see what I guess the panelists are saying there is like, see what your users need, see what your business needs in order to work faster, smarter, more efficient. And sometimes technology is not that solution. It might just be training. It might just be more consistency. It could be time. It could be space. It could be flexible in what's open, because I think when we get into technology, then we get disappointed sometimes that it's not solving everything we thought it would solve for, right? And it really should be assistive to making people work better and not really the solution per se.
Yeah, that definitely resonates, and it's such an important point. What I think is jumps out at me, we talk about right now the shift that the industry is making towards embedding these technologies to really change the way that we prepare submissions, and this may lead to changes in how our submissions look as well in the future. But what jumps out at me that's quite interesting is that as we talk about this, the regulatory professionals are at the center of these conversations, right? To scope and explore the feasibility of technology, to lead the embedding technology in an organization. And that's a bit of a unique role for a regulatory person. Certainly when I started in my career 20 years ago-ish, I didn't think that I would be quite this involved in technology anywhere in my career. And it really is requiring us to reinvent ourselves. And so there's no question coming around that. It's really just an observation. And so with that, so I'm looking.
Heather,
Yeah,
Heather, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
you just said something great that I'd like to expand on for a moment. I mean, some people fear technology because they think it's going to take our jobs. And I view it completely differently. I mean, I went to college with a typewriter. At some point, I mean, where I had to manually return. This is how old I am. But at some point I had to adopt tech that was going to be faster, right? So it had to be my willingness to do that, because that saved my resources. So I view technology as not a replacement, it's assistive, but that means we have an action. We have to be willing to modify our training, our role, etc., so that we know how to best use it. So I'm hoping that there can be a mindset shift from fear to interest, curiosity. What can I learn? What can I do differently, to utilize that? But anyway, that's just big on my mind these days. So sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm really glad you did, Angela, because it's such an important point. I have a number of regulatory writers in my organization, and I've led regulatory writers for a number of years now, and I've heard a lot about this over the years, is this fear or hesitation because perhaps the technology is going to impact my security as a writer. My job security, the impact I'm able to have for patients, when in fact you're absolutely right, that's not the case at all. Assistive is the word here. So I'm really glad we hung around that point for a second. Yeah.
And I want to jump off on that as well. It's not only necessarily a fear of the technology, but the technology could provide more of a hurdle. So even an example here, let's say you're using a structured content authoring platform and you're generating your protocol that's going to auto feed to the CSR. Well, that protocol writer might be saying, oh, I don't want to use this system. It's going to take me longer. But you have to think about the end product, right? The end product is getting that submission in at the CSR level and getting that into the submission. So even though it might take longer in that burden for your users to embrace that technology, think about the big picture. It's just going to make generating the CSR that much faster. So they have to it is a shift in the way of thinking, not the now, but thinking about the big picture and how these pieces all integrate.
Can I add to what Matt's saying? I think the three of us on this panel, Heather also, I guess, are in very large organizations, right? And there can be silos in these organizations and how people work and what they think about. Like your protocol writing team might be different than your CSR writing team in some ways. And it's really hard for people who are really good at a particular skill set or a particular piece of information and content, to think beyond that sometimes. And it is going to slow you down in some ways to think about where what I'm writing in a protocol can be reused across the universe of content in the organization. And so it is difficult to do. And I think acknowledging that it's difficult to do, but it has a cumulative benefit for people and for others, I think is really part of the sell. There's a big people change management aspect to it in the way that they think and work, really.
Yeah. That's a great segue. So thank you for that. We were going to talk a little bit about, what are the first steps that organizations should take, but I think you guys might have actually touched on that a little bit as part of the discussion that just happened. And so, bouncing off of what Eliza just said, what are some of the roadblocks or missteps that you've experienced along the way as you have scoped and or embedded technology in your respective organizations?
I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because there's not enough time. But I mean, the best way to do this, I mean, you've got to be so committed to your problem that you view roadblocks as learning opportunities and not yield signs or something.
Yeah.
For us, I would say it was the change management piece. That's where we're doing this as a side job. I wish we were Roche and we had this amazing department that could help mitigate this, but this is just normal medical writing people trying to solve this with an incredible IT group. So we thought we could launch software across the whole enterprise at once. No, it should be targeted. We also thought that every user of our software should understand every single element of all the bells and whistles and how you do things. No, if you're a clinical scientist contributor, you just need to know how to open it, add your information, save and close. So you learn as you go. You learn what people's frustration points are, where you need to come to the lowest denominator of tech skill in your organization, and you modify as you go, and you own the mistake. Like, hey, we goofed that. Give us a chance to try this again because the business benefit is so great. Give us a chance. So anyway, own the roadblocks as learning events, and that's the only way you'll make it through it sanely.
I think it's great advice. Yeah. Others, Matt, Eliza?
So
I was not expecting the amount of work needed for IT quality. So, again, maybe this is just because we're at a big organization, but these GXP systems, you have to develop these scripts, you have to test them, user acceptance testing. All that has to be done in like a validated system. It was way more than I was expecting. It was like another whole side job, and that was a surprise. Getting into, I don't know if this is necessarily a roadblock, but it was something, talking about what are the first steps. I just want to jump back to that one. Sometimes the technology doesn't fit the process, and Angela, good call. You definitely have to have flexibility, having your technology adapt to your current processes, but there's a little bit of give and take there. But I would say speak to your vendors, right? So this is all this is new cutting edge technology. The vendors want to serve the clients, and the clients want what the vendors offer. Speak to them. You're developing this together. It's sort of a collaboration in a way. So I would say, a nice learning is be open. You're all signed under non-disclosure agreements, but develop it together and think of it in that sense. That may help overcome some of the roadblocks, because you're certainly going to have systems, one system's not talking to the other. It's not going to meet your needs for whatever reason. You need to have their buy-in and their ability to adapt, I think is really important.
Agreed.
If I could add, maybe loop back to Roche and the content reuse and automation office, and maybe what Angela said. It's not that this department exists in Roche, because the people in this department exist in different departments and other companies, right? So I think there is that the role that you're filling might not exist in your current regulatory landscape or your organization or how things are put together. And I think that was a bit of a shift for us, a real understanding that people have to upskill in different areas, understand IT process, understand things like CSV and validation and all kinds of crazy things that you would not expect a medical writer or regulatory professional to have to know 10 years ago, right? And I think that's a big that was a big learning for us, is that some of what it takes to maintain these systems, connect them through content and not just sort of technical APIs and stuff, but in how people work with them and engage with each other and engage through them, takes a different type of role and mindset. And so that, I think that's a key thing, that sometimes we kind of let it become parts of other people's jobs without giving them the space to learn and grow and develop skills in that. And then one thing, which is I get a little bit different than everything that's been said, and maybe it's because it's dear to my heart, but I would say standardize. Standardize, standardize, standardize. So that's your content, your style guide, your templates, your process, the way you work across things. If you're doing things 2 or 3 different ways to achieve the same effect, technology is not going to help you. So if you have, like, I think the example here is if you have collaborative authoring in one space, but then you're still emailing documents in another, putting a technology solution only fixes 25% of what you're trying to achieve there, right? You really need to have consistent inputs in terms of process and people and content to really get the most value out of some of these technology solutions.
Yeah, it's a great point. The people, the skill set bit, and we are going to talk about that in a few moments. Let's talk about timelines. Everybody loves a good timeline, right? Regulatory people. And I wanted to bring this up because I would like our audience to have an appreciation for how long it takes to embed something like this. Because I fear that you guys are all, a little bit, you're pretty far in your journey. But how long has it taken you to get here? Because it's not an overnight thing. And I really think people need to appreciate that it's not going to be quick. It is going to take some time if done correctly. And so maybe just around the panel, for how long has your organization been working on this, trying to embed this technology?
That's
A long
almost
time.
embarrassing. That's almost embarrassing to say out loud. But no, but I think there is value to that. So we started our evaluation journey as to sort of where we wanted to go with content in 2019, right? We didn't really double down and make investments then, but I think that's where we started to think more from a strategy perspective, where we wanted to be with content like 5 years down the road, and then started to take some steps, right? And I think we've taken, considering how long ago I joke when I say it's embarrassing, but considering how long ago we started thinking about it to when we got to implementation, I think it's because we were cautious about not breaking the way we work, because that's very disruptive in a large organization, right? So these submission timelines, the delivery of some of these things, a lot of them are out of our control, and even the ones that are in our control can be quite aggressive. And we know that there's a lot of stress already involved in these jobs and these roles. And so we kind of have been sort of systematic and approachful in the way in which we've rolled out some of these things.
I just want to say I don't think it's embarrassing at all. I think that that's what it takes, right? To do something thoroughly when we're talking about embedding technology and really changing the way that you work. I mean, from the upstream, right? So you're teaching writers how to write differently so that their content can be reused. You're scoping technology. So I don't think 4 years is unreasonable at all. And, slap in a global pandemic and the fact that everybody here, you also have what I'm going to call your day job, in that you still have medicines and healthcare solutions that you're working on to get to patients while you're doing this. And so I wanted to ask the question because I do want people to appreciate it. It's not a quick overnight thing. You cannot say by the end of 2024, for example, we're going to have, this, that, and the other solution embedded. It does take a while to do it properly. So that's why I wanted to ask the question. Matt, Angela, do you want to weigh in on this one as well?
2019 is also where we started, and I appreciate what you just said, Heather, about the pandemic and our day jobs and what it took. I would say that if somebody else started today and you have an organization that has a good end user group who can do it, you have a good IT group, and you have budget. I don't think it will take you as many years it has taken the rest of us, partly because some of the technology that we're using, off the shelf in 2019 wasn't ready. So it was
Fair point.
incredible partnerships, like Matt was mentioning, between vendor and us, Roche. Well, I'm not going to name, there's a lot of big groups that are working with similar products. And the vendor collaboration is key. So I think between us, we have done a lot together with the vendors to make these products more ready for those who are newly embarking on it. So I don't think it'll take you quite the time, but you definitely shouldn't underestimate it. I'll give you an example. Senior leadership at my company assumed that we would evaluate a chat GBT LLM and within a couple of months have a tool that would write a CSR.
Right.
So
That sounds right.
no, we don't. But just so don't underestimate it. But I don't think it's going to take you 4 or 5 years.
Sure. I think it's a good point. Yeah, the technology was immature in 2019, or less mature, let's say, compared to what it is now. It's a great point.
Yeah.
So at Alexion, we started that initial agile sprint I had told you about, where we're doing evaluation with stakeholders and so on. That was in 2021, and our goal was to have robotic process automation, automatic generation of documents. And basically, we said, no, we can't do that without having more structure. We need structured content, and a structured content authoring platform. So that was decided in 2022. We started with our structured content platform this year in 2023. And we are, going through the ropes, so we're a little bit further behind than the other companies on the panel, but trying to take a more stepwise approach, starting small, and then learning. Again, agile approach, I guess, where iterative improvements as you go, because what we really don't want to have is a bad user experience.
Sure. That's very important, right? A bad user experience disengages people from the technology. And that is, it's a really good point. I do want to maybe just pause for a moment, because we are now starting to talk about AI and things like that. And just to sort of remind the audience and folks connected about the public nature of ChatGPT. And in particular, anything that you put in there becomes available in the public domain. So ChatGPT is certainly not something that companies are using for automation for that reason. So I think that that's important to point out. I want to shift a little bit towards people. And the people currently in a regulatory professional role, whether it's a regulatory writer or maybe you're a regulatory lead, and in particular also people who may be looking to join the regulatory profession and really think about skill sets of the future. So before I jump into the question, maybe I'll just share a little bit of my experience. So we talked a few moments ago about this idea of sort of retraining regulatory writers to write differently. So certainly at Certara, that's something we've been focused on for a few years now. So there's writing differently so that a piece of content can be easily reused throughout the life cycle of a molecule. But we also write differently to facilitate redaction and removal of information, any personal information regarding patients or company confidential information. So that's one way that we are reskilling. But also interesting, and going back to the AI bit, is we do have an AI tool that we are preparing to launch. And so we're currently working with regulatory writers to teach them how to write a good AI prompt. And going back to what I was saying earlier about, at times I feel like my career has taken directions that were unexpected. I didn't think that I would be this involved in technology, and I certainly didn't think that I would be working with writers to teach them how to write an AI prompt. And then so again, it's just an example or a way that demonstrates how the industry is shifting, how skill sets are needing to shift in order for people to do this job. And so you guys are well-respected leaders in the industry. And so I think so the question I want to ask while we're here, as leaders in the industry, when you are hiring, whether it be a regulatory writer or a regulatory professional of some sort, what are those skill sets that you're looking for now? Um, that because my hypothesis is that maybe they are different skill sets than 5 years ago or perhaps 10 years ago. And so when you're hiring somebody, what are the skill sets and capabilities that you're looking for?
I don't know that they're different. I'm going to challenge
All right.
the idea that they're different. I think it's more important than ever that the people that we bring on here are two things: flexible and have an innate ability to reframe a challenge. I mean, so we ask a lot of questions during our interviewing and our assessment related to challenges and what happened when you had the challenge and what did you do and what was the impact? And we try to assess, is this someone who, should that same thing happen 5 years later, we'll say, well, that'll never work. It never works. Sorry, there's no solution to this problem.
Right.
Or is this someone who's willing to say, we tried this, let's try something different and let's be interested about it. Again, I think being curious. So I'm not sure it has to be different, but maybe it's even more important that you've identified people who have that positive attitude and that flexibility, because you're going to be asking them to shift in so many different ways. Like you're talking about prompt engineers, who knew?
Right.
And so they have to have that curiosity, that built-in curiosity.
Yeah, I think that's key, that curiosity, this continuous learning mindset, wanting to sort of to change the way you work and be happy about it, not not be a resistor to some of that stuff. People who really are willing to embrace new ways of doing the same thing, because really the skill set that you reskill for right now isn't going to be the skill set you're going to need in 3 years or in 5 years. So it's somebody who is continuously looking to grow, to learn, is, open and positive about it, and is willing to embrace change in that way. It's funny because we as organizations are always told, people are really, they find change difficult, and we adapt to it in our daily lives every single day. Like your iPhone looks nothing like your BlackBerry did, and we just sort of accepted that and moved on. But when we get into work, people get into habits and expectations that things always look the same. And I think if we get stuck in that mindset, it really does hold us back to what's possible.
Yeah, I agree.
So I would say having a broad view. You don't necessarily want somebody who only knows how to write clinical study reports. They have to have, I think, a more broad view of what feeds into that clinical study report and how that clinical study report feeds into other documents. That's really vital in this type of, I guess, interconnected approach that we're really, that's kind of where we're moving in the future, is having everything connected. CRO training, I think, is really important as background, especially if you've been working with small clients, because you wear a lot of hats.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that helps you learn that, going through that, if you can go from from IND all the way, I'm thinking US, IND all the way to
Sure.
NDA. I mean, that's like ideal, right? The whole process and everything. In a small company, you're going to know like every document in that ECTD, or a general idea of how they all fit together and what depends on what. And that, of course, helps you when it's crunch time, which is at submission time. Being very techie. So I ask probing questions about how well they know Microsoft Word, and what's sort of the latest in industry. I'm looking for buzzwords like content reuse and things like that, just to make sure that they're aware of that. And as was already said, the ability to adapt. And I think we can probe on that. Based on asking them, how do you set up your reviews? If you could do any system, any technology you had, how would you want to set up your reviews? And how would you set up your meetings that you have? And you get they'll mention, oh yeah, if it's this way, I'll use like a table to prompt the team, and it shows that they have flexibility and that they've been through it and they're not just doing cookie cutter the same way. So that's how I have done it.
Thank you.
I agree with that too. And I think what we're saying in different ways is it also behooves the organization to offer a very generalized training space so that we are giving writers the right opportunity and not just be over specialized, because that's a short-term efficiency. You look for the long-term gain, then you need to expose your team to as many different document types as you can so that they can be more creative, when the new challenge pops up. So some of this ownership of this problem is on us, at our organizations, making sure that that training environment's in place.
Sure. Agree completely. What I really love about your answers is you're not saying things like, oh, they must be certified in this and that, for example. And I have a similar approach and a similar mindset. I look for candidates who have curiosity. You use that word, Angela, and that's one of my favorite things to explore is a curiosity and open-mindedness to do things differently. So yeah, it's just really encouraging how much the soft skills came up in each of your responses. And I'm trying now to monitor the chat a little bit because we're going to transition to questions soon. And I see a question about, transitioning into a regulatory profession from the CMC space or from a bench space. And so I'm glad that many of us are really focused on that soft skill stuff, soft skills, as opposed to just the technical, right? Technical is important. I always say it can be learned. And really it's the soft skills that determine success often. Okay, one more question. 5 years from now, I'm going to call you guys up. Probably not. It will be, something far more modern than a phone call. But 5 years from now, I'm going to call you up and say, hey, let's do another panel. And so my question is, in your opinion, what are the trends that you're seeing? So the actual question is, in 5 years, what is this going to look like? And so, pulling on trends in the current environment, your opinions, your experience, any of it, what does it look like 5 years from now? And Angela, you're big on my screen right now, so I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, gosh, it's such a great question. Without scaring the audience, I think AI is going to be a huge player for us. And it's not just going to be at the writing on the data summary. I think it's going to be on protocol development too, like using AI to look at all the different pieces of information that inform what you should do next with your study design. So I think we're going to see that. I think every piece of our documents will be data. That's digitizing text, so that it's all mineable and it's reusable. And to reiterate what we've been saying, I think prompt engineer will just be normal. I think that will be part of our day to day. So the great thing about this is none of the things I just said replace people, but it helps improve our ability to take on an increasingly high number of concurrent projects with the same resources. So that's what we're looking at, the ability to reach more patients with the same resources, not replace us, assist us. So anyway, I'm excited, hoping I'm still here.
I think I agree with that. I'm excited too, but maybe I think the hype will settle a little bit too, right? I think over the last year or so, where these large language models and OpenAI and GPT have hit the public forum, people have started to dream about what these things can do. And I think the reality of what they can do, we just haven't completely explored yet. And so I had somebody explain this in a really nice way, and I really like to think about it this way, is like some of these tools and these generation tools that are the current hype right now, they create what we call like transient content. It's not going to give it to you back in the same way. It's not necessarily going to be consistent in the way that it's doing things all of the time, and that's kind of the magic of what these things do. But that isn't necessarily what we need sometimes, especially in this industry and regulatory. We want a little bit more consistency. We want more persistent content, and that really takes effort from people, real unfortunate, consistency in style and accuracy and making sure things are factual and on claim and make sense and that they shouldn't be changed. And I think some of that will really start as people understand these things a little bit better. I think that's where I sort of see the future, people using these as assistive tools, but also not trusting them completely and relying on what they bring to the table. Because sometimes just because the technology can do it faster doesn't mean it can do it better.
So I agree, assistive technology, not replacement. I actually think that I think AI and SCA, structured content authoring, are gonna merge. And I think the human, the writer, is going to be in the middle, and that you're going to have a small section of text. This is kind of what I'm envisioning. Who knows if we'll even look using computer screens? It might be like Apple Vision. We've seen all those, where you're just kind of pulling information, via your one hub. Yeah, but you have to think about it. It's in 10 years, we're probably going to all be wearing these things in the office. But anyway, so view your text in your document. Let's just say it's a risk benefit. You're asking the AI, based on XYZ, how would you like to summarize the risk benefit? And then it comes to the human to make that decision. Yes, I like this. No, I don't. They tweak it, but then could that feed into a structured content authoring platform? It's locked with metadata, so that the next time that question's asked by the AI, have you actually trained it? Right? It gave you an answer, and you changed it and you locked it in. So that's a path of improvement. And I'm kind of thinking, how are these actually going to merge? I don't think it's one or the other, but I think, how can we leverage both of them? And you're always going to you could develop a document lickety split with an AI, and maybe you can tweak it, but the variation that you might have isn't something you necessarily want. And I think that's where the content platforms, the structured content platforms will help, being able to manage it and hopefully train it and improve it.
Yeah, thank you. I can't get past the image in my head about all of us in the office or virtually in a little virtual reality thing, pulling our content and documents together. So thank you for that visual, Matt.
It's very Tony Stark, right?
It is, but it's 10 years. You think about what happens in 10 years.
The regulatory professional is Iron Man. I love it.
Yep.
Thank you. And we are going to transition to questions now. So a couple of things. I don't think we're going to get through all the questions that have come in, which is not unexpected in these types of events. What I want to commit to is addressing them one way or the other. I am findable on LinkedIn, absolutely, as are the other members of the panel. And I'm going to put my email address in the chat, because I really want to ensure that we create a forum, an environment for the conversation to continue. I think we've all made it very clear, this is where we're going as an industry, right? There's no question about it. This is where we're going. And as regulatory professionals, we all need to come together. As we said earlier, we are the center of the wheel in many organizations that are trying to embed this technology. So I'm going to jump to the first question. And so for our amazing folks working the background here, I want to thank you for feeding the questions. I might jump around a little bit. Forgive me in advance. So we have a question for Elisa here specifically. Can you please share some of the challenges that your team faced while trying the NLG? And thank you in advance.
So I think one of those challenges is what I just mentioned, sort of this idea that it's transient. You kind of get a different output every single time you use sometimes even the same prompt. And that always isn't necessarily the best thing in some ways. And then there is also this idea that just because you have the data, you can create the content, but there's insights in this sort of meta world of a study or of a submission where we know that where the strategy is headed, where we know a little bit more about the safety profile or the product strategy than exists just in this document. So that flavor doesn't come into some of that text. And so I think what was happening is through some of our experiments, we were generating drafts, but then people were spending almost the same amount of time reviewing those drafts, editing those drafts, not a lot of trust in that also, that, just because it was generated, we were still QCing, we were still looking at some of the things like, I would say, like somebody who was outside of the program wrote you a piece of content. And I think that was a little bit difficult for us in our early experiments. I think now that maybe these things are a little bit more mature and you can train them on individual sets and different programs and areas, we might get a little bit better quality. But quality was definitely one of the things that was, didn't sit well out of some of these experiments.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in an effort to answer as many as possible. I'm just going to keep jumping. There was a question. Oh, see, this is, there was a question about describing, can you please describe how the SCM or SCA system works specifically? And so I'm sorry, I'm jumping around different chats. And I want to make sure that I get it.
I could take this one because I actually have kind of a passion for what I'm viewing as the future on this. I think Microsoft Word is going to be the hub that I was talking about with that vision, and all these plugins are going to. You've got a plugin for reference management, a plugin for these QC tools, tables that feed in, natural language generation, your content reuse, and so on. And that the stakeholders are actually going to be interfacing with something very familiar, which is Microsoft Word. So that's currently the SCA system that we're doing. That's our interface currently, and that's what I'm hoping will be the future, because everybody builds a Microsoft Word plugin.
I agree with that, Matt. We're using something that utilizes Word as well. But Heather, do you have that slide that I loaned you with the cartoon? Because I think if people don't know what SCA is, then the cartoon sort of illustrates the business value. But while she's pulling up, the idea is if you, at the protocol level, Matt referred to this before, you have study design elements that are going to go all the way down to the CO, especially if it's a single study submission. So you write them in such a way that they are CO worthy. More importantly, when you're at the CSR, they're, primary efficacy endpoint, key safety from that study support your label. And so in this cartoon, if you follow the color, you see how if you write it once well in the CSR, then you're going to use parts of it. This is about componentizing the content, upper summary, more details. So fit for purpose movement of those level of details all the way down to your CO. So it does require that the team be working as a team and not thinking about document ownership, but thinking about content ownership. I own efficacy. So efficacy appears in all of these documents from the pivotal on down. I am going to be part of that logic planning for the content. In a best case scenario, and I'll tell you, we aren't there yet. We've had almost a year of having this launched at Pfizer, but the best thing you're hoping for is in the CO, the only part you're spending significant time on is the benefit risk, which is a novel section. That's what you're hoping, but it does require that the team thought about the logic and the content ahead of time so that these things can travel down and that they be okay with not wordsmithing just because. That's a big behavior to overturn. Yes. But this is what SCA can do for you. We have this implemented at Pfizer now.
Elisa, do you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I think it's the exact same thing. I think the only difference when we think about structure, so I think at our respective companies, we have structured content management systems. So the ways in which these pieces of information move across these documents is automated. But I think what this visual shows you is that you can do this from a planning perspective, even in a Word document, right? If you think about your content strategy for your filing or how you want these submission docs to come together, you can do this without the assistive technology, a little bit more control over your review behavior, and probably a lot of reminders that please don't touch these things, please don't change these things. But it is still possible without technology to do this, because it is the mindset shift of the fact that I'm creating something so valuable that it will be used across the entire submission module.
And how does your, so thank you for that. I think that that's a really important point, because the stakeholders around the regulatory professional have to get used to the idea that you are going to review something one time and we are going to reuse that thing that you reviewed, and you're not going to get to review it again. And so that sometimes is also a bit of a shift for people. How does your SCM system look and feel? So that was sort of the second part of this question. What does it feel like? Like, what does the interface look like? Does it look like Microsoft Word? Does it look completely different?
Yeah, so I would say it looks, I think we all have the same system, and so it is a plug-in to Microsoft Word. But what I would say is that what it is it gives people a familiar authoring environment, because that is their primary job, is to create good content and be able to use the desktop publishing tools that are built into Microsoft Word in order to get these documents submission ready, because we are submitting Word documents still at the end of the day. So trying to have that sort of environment where it's not so intrusive on what people actually know their jobs are, and just have maybe something that augments it a little bit to help that reuse of content across is really the type of system that I think will survive for the future.
Sure. We're at time, and as anticipated, we didn't come close to answering all the questions. This topic is, so hot right now. Fully anticipated there'd be a lot of questions. So to the audience, I say that we commit to answering the questions one way or the other. And I have to be very vague right now on how we're going to do that. But we do have everybody's registration emails. So we do have your information. I want to thank the panel. So these are 3 individuals that I know from the industry, or possibly former lives, and you immediately said yes to doing this. Your passion for the topic, you are spearheading and helping to shift our entire industry. Thank you so much for participating. I am looking at the lovely emojis, and I think the regulatory community really appreciated you sharing your experience and your expertise. And to the folks that joined today and took time to listen to what we had to say, I want to thank you so much for joining. And, I'm going to say until next time, because maybe we need to do another one of these next year, because it is moving so quickly. And thank you to the RAPS organizers as well for telling us what to do and where to be and how to do this. So yeah, thanks to the entire team that made this happen. And that's it for today, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you again for joining. Somehow we will look back on all of the questions, but you all have my email address now, and can be found on LinkedIn as well as the panelists if you want to keep the conversation going. And that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks
Enjoy
for
the rest of
inviting
your
me,
day.
Heather.
Thanks so much.
You are most
Bye.
welcome.